right. So here we are to talk about Toni at Random.
Yes.
I just want to first congratulate you.
Thank you.
This is a magnificent book. And I think many of us know a lot about Toni Morrison. And we've known her as a novelist, and we've grown up, for me, I read The Bluest Eye in high school, maybe the 10th grade in Teaneck, New Jersey. And we all came to her in different ways, but most recently as an editor and working in publishing at Penguin Random House. It's fascinating, the legacy. And it's also really hard to access these histories of what it's like to acquire and edit and fight with agents and, figure out the brass tacks of how a book gets made. But first I wanted to just sort of start by asking you both who Toni Morrison is to you before we hit her editorial work.
So two things. I think my first exposure to her is as a writer. I was definitely a reader, and then I probably would describe it as a personality. She was a whole personality. In part because I talk about this a little bit. The person who was a kind of conduit for me in terms of the trust factor, and hopefully we'll talk about that, like trust is so important. But her relationship with Eleanor Traylor and then my relationship with Eleanor Traylor meant that I saw a side of her that was unvarnished, because Eleanor's position, Dr. T's position, like overwhelmingly was, if you're in this house, there was a what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of experience. So there was a moment where there were levels of comfort. So I also began to know her as a very human person who was friends and just generous and also
dance. There's a great picture of her at a party somewhere where she's kind of sweating and hair is loose and she's just clearly going for it.
Yes. And no bra.
And no bra. She absolutely does not.
And I'm like, all right.
A friend of mine said it to me. I have a picture framed in my house, and that is true. She's definitely not wearing a bra.
Yeah.
So you knew her as a human, right?
Yes.
Like obviously as a writer, we've heard about the work. And how do you think people? Before I move to you, how do we perceive her culturally? I think as a writer, like what does she stand in the American canon?
I think most people are aware of her as an American Nobel laureate. And people who are in literature are really thinking about it from the perspective of a person who has like a whole collection that somebody thought was exceptional. You can win a Pulitzer, you can win a National Book Award, but the Nobel says you have a body of work that's really important. I don't think people know the backstory around the Nobel, like how there had to be protests to get it because people were being shut out, discriminated against, like women, black people, Americans, the whole thing. But people are thinking she must be something special. So I think that's how people encounter her. And she's, I think, probably also the writer that everybody is supposed to have read, whether they have or not.
And for everyone, it's not just like black people are supposed to have read Toni Morrison, but it's like if you were a good reader, you're supposed to have read Toni Morrison.
That's right.
And so how about for you? Who's Toni Morrison for you?
So I said in the green room that I was going to do what they do when they say, this is a comment, more than a question, right? But I just want to say, Sister Dana, I'm so grateful for this book in this very fraught time. I've been doing something that's still under embargo so I won't go too much into it, but I was doing some research on Beloved, and I posted on Instagram just a picture and said, I miss her, or I miss you, or something like that. And I think about what she would have offered us in these few months, and this book is right on time for me. I needed that. So, but I think it's interesting when you're talking about Dr. Traylor, who you call Dr. T, in your acknowledgments, because same here, I'm dear friends with Sonia Sanchez, who I call Miss
And can you
Sonia.
say a little more about Dr. Traylor? So people know.
Dr. Traylor.
Yeah.
So Dr. Traylor is like a legend in African American literature. She was she only chair of English, or was she a dean?
She was chair of English.
She was chair of English at Howard University. So very well known in Black academic circles. I remember constantly encountering her at CLA, College Language Association, which you mentioned, which CLA was, I think, founded sort of to give Black literary scholars a place to present their work when they weren't really allowing people to do that at MLA, right? And so then on a personal note, Dr. Traylor and my mom went to Spelman together, and they have the same birthday, you know, and all of that, right? And so, Sonia Sanchez, who I call Miss Sonia, and Lucille Clifton, who is late, that I still call Miss Lucille, they used to refer to her in our conversations. Miss Sonia still does as Toni. Mm-hmm. And so every single time they would say, Toni such and such, and I'd be like, Toni who?
Right. They were so casual about it.
Right, so casual, right? You know, and I remember when I was going back and forth about whether I was going to retire early, and Miss Sonia was like, you know, I had the same conversation with Toni, my dear sister. You know, she always says, my dear sister. When, you know, and I said, Toni who? And she said, will you stop doing that? You know what I'm talking about. So I just want to thank you. This book is so needed. I feel her all through the pages. But the other thing is, the gossip is delicious. The publishing gossip, all the stuff that sort of jumps off.
Somehow I didn't think about that way. I don't know how, but when Vulture ran something that said, what's better than literary gossip? I was like, nothing.
Nothing. Because then you find out these sorts of things. And for me, the biggest thing is realizing how Black she was.
Extremely Black.
Right? And the way that, well, people want me on the panels because I'm just straight no chaser. I just keep it real, so get ready. But the way that people have tried to deracinate Toni Morrison, make her into this special Negro that's different from the rest of the Black people.
Right.
And then you see in the pages of this what I consider to be, like, seriously, a monumental history, like a monumental history, a history that should be taught, a history that will continue to be read, right? When you see that she published the guy who wrote The Case for Black Reparations, like, you cannot get that more Black.
Right.
Okay, so there's...
You can get Blacker than publishing it, arguing about the title all the way until the very end post-sales conference.
That's right.
Exactly. just and constantly the way she was like, no, we're not gonna have that title. We're gonna have, I mean, she even did it with you. So that's what I have to say, because this, you know, I won't go on and on, but this is really, for me, just a gift, particularly at this point in American history, when we are missing her wisdom, and when we Black people really need to understand she was ours first, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
I want to say just a little bit too about Dr. T, because I think it's important to know her in terms of personality, and I can tell that, like, through a number of different ways, but the one that Bill, my husband, will appreciate the most is we were at Morrison's service at St. John Divine, and also, like, as a sticking point here, so she also planned James Baldwin's funeral, like Dr. Traylor. So like this, so she's back in the cathedral, not for the first time since then, but Bill has her and wheeling her in, and she's got the ego of, like, a very serious person, so she's, like, really wanting to get up out of the chair. Like, she don't want people to see her in the chair, but she's also like, but this could be grand. I can make an interest. And so she does, so he pushes her in. And Oprah comes, like, from the side, never says hello to Bill, just goes straight, like, Eleanor! So that's Eleanor Traylor.
Yeah.
Like, the person who is, like,
I didn't know they knew each other.
From Maya Angelou.
Oh, yeah, all of those dramatic
All of
Black
the connections.
women.
That's right. That's right.
So I want to... So this is a book of connections.
Yes, it is.
Because, it was interesting because you know the story of sort of Lorain, Ohio, and, the mythology of Toni Morrison, right? You know where she comes from. You know she's really smart. You know that she sort of works in publishing and that she's very rigorous and that, she's got 2 small children and she figures out how to write these novels at an older age and, up we fly. But there were all these people along the way, whether it was at Howard, whether it was people that she encountered when she was in New York as an editor, right, that are informing who she is and therefore end up informing Black literature and therefore American literature. And so I want to talk a little bit about your understanding of the networks that Toni Morrison was building. And some of them started quite early in her career as an academic. Some of them come much later. But, what do you think some of the key relationships that she forged were? Not necessarily the spicy fun, she was best friends with this person.
Yeah.
But who really helped to build her intellect?
That's such an important question, which is why I thought it was important to have that chapter on finding her form. Where Morrison's trying to figure out, how am I going to show up in the world? We hear this line in Sula that's had she had her form, she would not have been derailed in a particular way. So I think that there was something slightly autobiographical about it in the sense of what happens to people when they don't have their form. So I think one of her first forms, especially as a young adult, was as a dancer and then as an actress. So she spent a lot of time on the stage at Howard and really says that she remembers Howard most fondly for that role. And there were people there who I think helped her in ways that continued to impact her over the course of her life and her career. Owen Dodson, the great playwright, being one of them. And then the connections around HBCU networks is how she got the job at Texas Southern, and then she comes back to Howard, but she's also participating in a troupe of actors who are going around the South, which is one of the first times that she actually sees and understands the South, having come from Lorain, and that's with James Butcher, John Lavelle, and Ann Cook, who was known all over for her work in the theater. And I think Ann Cook taught elocution, so Morrison learned sound. And I remember hearing the conversation that we were having about, so what was so special about the theater? It's that's where you learn voice. That's where you learn how to hear people. That's where you learn how to move. That's how you learn how to put a set together, put a scene together. And you don't necessarily think about building characters and building voice because you have to do that as an actress.
But also watching some of those interviews, it's also how you learn how to put somebody in their place.
That's right.
Just thinking that.
You never forget
There's the performance element that's always there.
That gangstery.
Yes.
She knew what to say, but the fact that she knew how to say it. There's that one moment where she's like, how do you know you're any good?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Or when she gets that white woman gathered. When that white woman, she says, why haven't you written about white characters or whatever? And Professor Morrison says, I have. In this stop right there. But the lady don't stop.
Well, she always gives you a warning.
Yeah,
She
right.
always
There was the warning shot.
gives
She
you
always
the
says, well,
warning
is that a
shot.
smart question?
Right.
And the interviewer would say, well,
Right.
I think
And
it
she
is.
just
And then
keeps
she's
on
like, well, then
going.
now you must suffer.
And then she does. I call it the whispery gangster town.
Do you understand?
Do you understand how profoundly racist that is?
I'll never get over
And then the lady swallows and you see her throat go up and down. And I'm like, but she tried to let you know.
To back up.
Don't do that.
But that one where she's like, well, you have to stand on my neck. And then we have to run a race, and how do you know that you won? And you're just
You can only
I'm
be tall when somebody else is on their knees. Right? There's just a million of them.
Yeah.
They're
she
proverbs.
was a theater person.
Yes, so that's the point.
Yeah.
That she was a theater person. She was absolutely, she understood what it meant to perform and to show up in a way. I think also she was impacted by some of the writers that she edited, understanding what they were doing. And she was clear that she wanted to write without thinking about the gaze, without thinking about who's the white reader that I have to talk to, or how can I write to people so that the reader is me and I get to tell the story. And seeing and finding other writers who were able to do that, I think emboldened her as well, because she didn't want to do that work by herself.
Right.
So what is it? And she also didn't want it to think that it could only look one way.
Can you say more about that? Because she seems like the kind of person who would have just done it all by herself.
And I think to some degree she could have, but it's so clear that she was not interested in that, because Gail Jones, who's an incredible writer in her own right, but who was not the kind of boisterous personality and did not want to do press.
Right.
And you both know how important it is to do press for a book. That is what sells the book. But Gail Jones is like, no, I don't really want to talk.
Gail Jones is actually, I think, very, I think she might suffer from anxiety or something like that. And so she just refuses to do press.
And Morrison just took it and like just wrapped her arms around her. And while Morrison is doing press for her own books, she's promoting Gail Jones. In part because she doesn't want to be the only black woman writer who's getting any kind of attention. Now, she was also very sophisticated in it, because she didn't want the two of them to be reviewed together just because they were black women
So she
writers.
like staggered.
Before we go here, I just want to back it up a little bit, because we haven't really gotten to Toni becoming an editor.
Yes.
Right? So take us through like why that job came up for her and why it might have been a good fit. Briefly, because you should read the book. Everybody's planning on reading the book, yes? If they haven't already.
She had taught at Howard for 7 years, and most universities had this rule. Now, the kind of funny part is that Howard, to some degree, still has this rule, which is a point of, had it up until this year. But the expectation was that you would earn a PhD in your 7 years, and then you would move on to a permanent position and not an instructor position. She had gotten to the end of her 7 years, and she had not pursued the PhD seriously at all, wasn't necessarily interested in it, because she was also of that age where she thought part of her job was to, you know, teach, get married, have children, have a good life, and read books. And she finds herself back in Ohio because she doesn't have a job. And she has one son, she's divorced, and she's pregnant with another son. So she has one thing in mind: I am not staying in Ohio. What can I do? Begins to pursue a number of different career types, but has just finished as one of many editors on a book called College Reading Skills. In addition to having been a teacher, she understood like how to make a book work and would complain about books that didn't work. So I think like that kind of inspiration for editing is important. She takes this job at L.W. Singer, a small textbook publishing company. And then, because I think in large part of their personality, when the executives come to Singer before they are ready to close the audience to make a determination about who is going to go to Manhattan, we see ultimately she's one of the folks who's chosen to go to Manhattan to become an editor.
Which seems incredible to me, because it's like, I'm not even sure that I allowed myself for many years to believe that I ever could be an American book editor or publisher. I don't know that I can believe I can now.
Yeah.
But what gave her the gall to believe that she could do it?
Oh, I think she came here like that. I think being raised, and I'm serious, and being raised around strong black women, a strong family, like her time at an AME church, her time at a Catholic church, like it's almost like she was born for it. Like what else was there to do? There was this expectation for excellence, and if somebody was doing a thing that was the best, or the thing that she thought she could do better than somebody else, she was gonna say, I think I can do that better than somebody.
But what did it look like for a black person in publishing at that point?
Oh, she was alone, by and large.
And for a black woman, I mean,
as a black woman, definitely.
And I think that might, I can only guess, might have, you've spoken about this a bit, Dana, might have contributed to the way that she moved in publishing. Because when you said, Lisa, she could have done it alone, I think that we think that about black women. Because of the face that we carry. And so I do think that for many of us, when we look at Toni Morrison, we're looking at her as like a superhero. But when we're looking at small children, pregnant, separated from her husband, these are all vulnerabilities. And so you have to step out on faith, and it's not, I think, superhuman strength. It's just simply this is what you do. This is when you have these little people that you have to take care of and all of that. And then the fact is, I remember, because I've watched the pieces that I am like 3 or 4 times, when I want to soothe myself, I watch her interviews. I'll just watch them over and over. And there's this point where she talks about growing up, there was no shame or something like that in poverty. And it wasn't about ambition. Right? So she had siblings, so there were all these people saying, you can do this or whatever. There's always community. And I think that's what the book says to me even further, right? Instead of looking at her as this one singular person. Yes, she's singular, but she is surrounded by people. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, so she has sorority sisters and, all of that. And my dad taught with Toni Morrison at Howard, so when you're mentioning Owen Dotson, he was very good friends with Owen Dotson. So there's all of this, sort of stuff going on.
A network, for sure.
A network, yes.
I think, too, especially as it relates to publishing, the thing that kind of moves her from acquiring authors who are first-time writers, and she's just slowly building her list. The game changes, I think, with Angela Davis. At that point, when she's able to score that, and she doesn't score it neatly, in the sense that Angela Davis's team had been working with Bantam Books. Bantam needs a hardcover publisher. Morrison has actually been working on the periphery, not even knowing that these things are happening at the same time. And then ends up saying, oh, okay, we can, if Bantam is doing this with Random House and she's working, trying to convince Angela Davis's team that she can do this, then it comes together nicely because they're able to build trust. And that's why, again, that network, and what trust looks like and feels like, and being able to anticipate what the public is going to want is, I think, really important.
So, I'm in the book is just full of so many of these great letters and conversations and just moments where, she's gossip with this person or getting along with this person or it's working out or, she had to do some, jiggling to make it work. But what was she like at work? I think that's, for me, was really curious because it's like there's all these relationships between the Black writers, or the writers who were interested in Black subjects that she was interested in. But, when you're inside of a publishing house and you have that capacity to theatrically destroy somebody with a dumb opinion, you can't really do that.
Oh, girl.
Right?
You can't really do that. Publishing is a really collaborative exercise. You've got the copy editors, and you've got you've got the designers, and you've got, your publisher who's signing off on the money, and there's the president, and you're really dealing with a lot of people who all feel or are extremely well informed about the process of making books. And so here comes Toni Morrison. And she's got all the opinions and all of the confidence in the world and all of these connections to a community that she knows have beautiful things to deliver to the world. How does she manage to navigate that personality, that intellect, and that, sort of, I wouldn't say superiority, but I feel like I would have felt quite small if she was out-thinking me out loud.
I think the through line was her commitment to excellence and then her ability to actually produce that excellence. But there's also the kindness that goes in, like baking. If she liked you, you got food. If she didn't, not so much. If
that carrot cake.
But did she like her colleagues?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially on the peer level, they got along well.
Okay.
I think her office often was this magnet where people were constantly in and out. So people I talked to were amazed that she was able to get any work done because it was almost the station where everybody stopped in here or there. But she was also a voracious reader, so she could probably read faster than most people. But she was incredibly empathetic and kind to the folks who work for her. Again, if she was writing with you, at one point she had someone who was working with her typing, and that person was doing that work overtime. And she put in for that person to get paid for overtime. And the account people say, you don't approve overtime. And she says, unless y'all are so poor that we can't pay people for doing their jobs, and if that's the case, I should probably be looking for another job myself. We are going to treat this person with a level of respect and regard and make sure that we pay this person. But if we're in that kind of position, just let me know.
Well, these are the relationships I'm curious about with the finance folks being like, no.
Yeah.
I'm less, that makes sense.
Yep. But she was also aware of her profit and loss statement. So she knew, I am making this company enough money to be able to do this. And I think she built relationships around her, almost the energy that she understood it took to navigate all kinds of spaces. And not to say there's this phony space or this phony reality, but again, knowing what everybody needed. And I think about the example that I give of a title page for the Barbara Chase Rabeau book. There is this image, this silk screen, and Barbara Chase Rabeau is like, that's awful. And she says, well, when I go to the designer and tell them that at one point you were of his guild, after he falls off, gets up off the floor from his conniption, I will tell him what you said. So she was willing to talk to the designer. She's like, I can assure you, we've talked about every aspect of your book. So she treated, I think, design team, cover team, marketing team, everybody with a certain level of respect, which is easy when that hasn't always happened to you.
Right.
So you know how important it is to make everybody feel completely included. And then there were plenty of people who were just still, no matter what, who just marveled over, like, she was just a larger than life personality.
Yeah. I'm always trying to figure out how she got away with what she got away with.
Yeah.
Because she was very openly talking trash about the American publishing industry the entire time that she was working.
As a black woman,
and
being the only black woman, that's to me the elephant in the room. Like, we're looking how extraordinary her intellect was and all of that. But then to have an extraordinary intellect, to have an extraordinary work ethic. I think about what Martha Southgate was talking about in that fabulous review in the New York Times that just happened, right? And I'm thinking about that, but at the same time, being surrounded by nothing but white boys.
I think it was
like
tough.
that.
Well, I think she was really complex. That's what I'm sort of dancing around, which is that, she was a lot of different things at the same time. And I think that can be explored through her relationships in publishing, but also through her publishing.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about the books? Because they're really rangy.
Yeah.
And they're not at all like what you would necessarily, like if you read her fiction and you were like, okay, this is what this woman's work reads like, and what would this person edit based on what they're writing?
And I thought initially that the book was going to be about the fiction, because that was the Morrison that I knew. And I thought, okay, so I know that she's edited these writers who were fiction writers, and that's what I'm most interested in. So we start having these conversations, or I think we're going to have these conversations about the fiction writers, and she won't talk about the fiction writers. Okay, that's fine. She's a great storyteller. I can hang in there. Interview number 2, she's still not talking about the fiction writers. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know that she did this. I didn't know she did this kind of book. But part of her pride, to some degree, and I remember her taking the book off of the shelf, and she's like, have you seen this book? This is a beautiful book. And it was like really gorgeous, the cover. And she had taken so much pride in the fact that she chose the cover. The folks who were the editors of this anthology, Contemporary African Literature, were members of faculty. Random House had some money for them to be able to go and get these images from Africa, but they couldn't get time off from their job, so she ends up having to go through this library to find it. So part of what I think she was communicating early on was not quite editing the fiction was easy, but that was expected. Like, here's some books that you didn't know that I did that were really interesting. Creole Feasts, a cookbook from these chefs from New Orleans. We talked about Boris Bidker's The Case for Black Reparations, a book about railroads. We know the Black Book story, but because the Black Book had done so well, she was interested in doing another book that was a memorabilia book. So this book on trains. A book that didn't do so well by most standards, but it was by Bill Cosby, but she had gotten him to do the intro for the Black Book, and he was the most popular figure in the country at the time. And also she's like, I just need to recruit him on my list, because at some point he's going to do something else.
He did.
So, yes, so she has, yes, something whole other else, yes. So there are all of these...
Be nice, Lisa.
There are all of these interesting types of books. Grow or die trying.
Well, I mean, she's a completely exceptional publishing career. I mean, everybody has a lane. And, you know, and when I was reading it, sort of the fiction felt like she had to prove herself. You know, and it really, the literary fiction, it wasn't just about not jumping in, but also about, you know, you're in a bro-y culture. You know, and everybody's kind of like, it's like the, you know, it's an era where
also
you know,
people
American
do not...
fiction is like a big deal. And there's a lot of like gravitas to sort of publishing something cool that does well, that's also really worth it. And it feels like she kind of like takes her time figuring out what her voice is. So maybe a little bit about the fiction.
And it varies. I think the thing that she wanted more than anything was to make sure that there was a book that was available to the reader that would not be available otherwise.
Right.
So whether it's the fiction or even the way that she does the Angela Davis story or the way that she does the Muhammad Ali story, she's thinking, I want this book to be represented in a way that the reader can't get this anywhere else in this way.
Right.
Yeah, so that kind of uniqueness factor for her was really, who's your reader? Who are you talking to? And how do we talk to each other and everybody else gets to eavesdrop? It's still a great story, but I'm talking to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, so she's obviously worked with all these incredible writers, and I think for both of you as writers, and as professors, and as scholars, like...
I'm retired.
Well, you know, you were...
I got on the Underground Railroad and I got out of academia, but keep on going.
But, you know, what do the books that she's published mean to us as literary professionals, as educators, as readers, as women, and as writers?
I'll pick up the Toni K. Bambara thread and say, publishing Toni K. Bambara, like, just brings me joy.
Transformative.
Just
transformative.
Like, and that in and of itself is a story, because short stories and poetry don't make a whole lot of money in publishing. Still don't. But she's willing to risk it all for Toni K. Bambara's collection of short stories, Gorilla My Love. Bambara does not have a novel ready. It takes 2 short story collections for her to convince Bambara to do a novel.
And then she doesn't know how to write a novel?
And then, exactly, she's like, I don't know. Like, you would think I never read a novel, let alone ever picked up one, like not knowing how to do the writing. But I think having Morrison as an editor who brings to us a Leon Forrest, a Gail Jones, a Toni K. Bambara, a Wesley Brown, or John McCluskey, especially at the time when we weren't seeing as much African-American fiction as we were seeing African-American poetry, and then we were not seeing stories by Black men told in a way, which is a whole other story, because you'll, like, those of us who are nerding out in African-American literary studies will know during that period, there was supposedly a beef between Black women and Black men.
I remember that. Yes. Ishmael Reed,
Which was interesting, because the correspondence between Morrison and Ishmael Reed makes clear that the beef is manufactured.
Right. And he was also, Ishmael at that time was super close to Terry McMillan.
Yes. And part of what he said, he's like, I said one thing, and it got taken as something else, but then he is also a provocateur, to his credit.
Yeah, he enjoys being a provocateur.
I'm going to go with it. So she's also making sure that she balances her list out. As much as we talk about her work with Black women writers, she's also making sure that, you know, Leon Forrest is a Black male novelist, John McCluskey, Wesley Brown, any number of things that you think, like, there's this lane, as you suggest. She's like, no, we're not doing lanes. I'm just going to do a lot of what I want and some of what comes on my desk, because if I do that, then I get to do these other things that I really want to do.
Right. You know, so the care, too, the way these books were published, right? I mean, there's a difference between somebody fighting for you at sales conference and somebody not understanding how to fight for you at sales conference. You know, there's a difference between the way that you coordinate a team that's working on a book. I was looking at the original copy of Divine Days in Chicago, and it's marked up because he was so upset that there were like over 1,000 errors in the issue that was the edition that was printed, and so they're just now about to reissue it right now. But I imagine that in her careful hands. This
Yeah.
sort of thing doesn't happen. And so why was it important for these authors to have Toni beyond literally the taste?
Literally, because you want the best book possible to be produced. And so she had edited Leon Forrest's first 3 novels. She actually turns over the last one to Errol McDonald, who she's excited about. Errol's still in the industry, but part of the thing that was exciting to her is like,
And Errol is a
finally,
tremendous editor that works at Knopf.
yes, and she's like, finally somebody else, like, but that's 10 years later. That she has somebody else that she can, so she turns it over, that 3rd novel, but
Also, Errol was not responsible for the errors in Divine Days.
No, that's what I was about to say. And so he does Divine Days somewhere else because she had fought so hard for Leon Forrest at Random House when the book wasn't doing well.
Right.
But Ralph Ellison, who blurbed Nobody, wrote a whole page and a half talking about how wonderful this book was, which scores a point in Morrison's favor because they're all also wanting to know, how did you get Ralph Ellison to blurb a Nobody?
To blurb.
Yeah, to blurb, period. Let alone this long.
And he didn't have a lot of respect for a lot of
Writers.
I think about that review that he wrote on Leroy Jones before he became Amir Baraka, and he was pretty stank.
Yeah.
And,
So I think that it's that kind of thing, though, that gets the people at the house saying, okay, how did she pull this off? Like, first, how did she find this guy? Because he's not published anywhere else. And then how does she bring him into the literary world in a way that Random House was right on the edge of appreciating literary books as much as they appreciated profitable ones. As long as both things were there. But there was a time, and she laments the time passing when they cared more about money than they cared about the literature. And I think that that's the case for most houses, just because they were bought up. Also, they weren't independent anymore in the same way. Long way of saying she's able to fight for those 3, but when she stops editing, he can't get another contract at Random House for Divine Days. And he's used to an editor who not only pays attention to him and says, she says, Leon, this tree must be significantly pruned. And the title of the book is...
He's used to a thought partner,
Yes.
as my agent is fond of saying.
Divine Days may have needed to be significantly
It probably did need, it is. I would
1,300, 1,400 page book, yes.
Yep. So I think the difficulty of having an editor who will tell you that, but also who makes sure that you get the same copy editor and the same typist. She would do, like, she was that careful with detail to say, the person who typed for you the last time, like, and this is her, like, I'm sorry, I'm leaving, I have to do my own work now, but I have good news. I got a great editor for you, and I got the person who is your copy editor and your typist from the last time. Like, that's the kind of care she had with her authors.
Amazing. So we talked about Errol, right? But now Toni leaves a generation of writers behind her in a short period of time working as an editor. Who does she leave behind administratively? Like, does she create, she was able to sort of create community amongst academics and thinkers and collectors and artists. But inside of the sort of professional world, did she leave behind a legacy that allowed us to move forward editorially and within these publishing houses?
Unfortunately, no. And I think that it was a fight that she decided not to pursue, that she would fight for the authors more than for positions. And here's what I mean. Part of the reason that Paula Giddings worked at Random House, when she worked at Random House before she becomes professor, before she writes, is because they had this internship program. Charles Harris, who's an editor at Random House before Morrison, and they're there for a short period of overlap, has gone through the business process of what it means to be an editor. When he's hired initially at Doubleday, they tell him, you need to understand what bookmaking is from start to finish. So he says, all right, the only way that I change this industry is if I can do these things. So he starts this internship program where he has 2, 3, 4, 5 students from Howard and every HBCU every summer. And then he leaves and he starts the Publishing Institute, which was supposed to be an incubator. Once he leaves, and it would be easy, it wouldn't be too far of a jump to say that part of the reason that he leaves is because of what he's trying to do, very specifically around race and around changing the industry. And I did talk to him, and I never got him to say a whole lot more than we weren't interested in doing the same thing anymore. And so I knew it was time for me to leave. And this opportunity to found a press at Howard, he thought, I can really do what I want to do with Black publishing. She doesn't try to fight for that program in the same way that he had. So she doesn't have a cadre of folks the way that we see coming up from the publishing course that was by then at Howard.
I wonder what it would have looked like.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of cycles later. If she
we know it would have been better. We know it would have been better than what is now, which is not, I can't even say it's not as good as. I think the industry now it may be worse than it was before, just in terms of diversity, which is...
I'm going to no comment that one.
Yep, which is difficult, yeah. It's difficult.
Not my business.
Difficult to think about. The other thing, too, that you mentioned that I think is important in relation to this conversation is there also needs to be a Marie Brown book as a publisher. There needs to be a Phil Petrie book as a publisher. Like, these are all editors.
Yeah, legendary.
Legendary editors, agents who were doing this work around the same time. So in the same way that essentially Dr. T just, she gives me this. She's like, here's this project. Here's this. And I fought kind of tooth and nail, like, no, I want to do some other thing. I really want to talk about Toni K. Bambara, or she's like, no, like, you do this thing and this. So she gives me the project. I'm giving the project over to, like, I'm telling people there are other editors who are doing this work, and there are other opportunities to make visible the work that is happening. Like, somebody needs to tell the story of what the industry has looked like since the 80s.
Right.
From the perspective of...
somebody else needs to be in them archives.
Yeah, I would agree.
You know what I'm saying? Somebody, I mean, that
making
was...
the archive, because my fear
making
is
the archive.
we're so digital now.
That scares me. That's one of the things, again, that I found as somebody who spent 15 years in the archives researching Phyllis Wheatley Peters. What was so extraordinary about your book is I saw those archives and I saw the granular detail, and somebody needs to be teaching these Black kids how to do that same thing and how to be knowledge, how to tend the altars of this moment that we're in right now.
Because it's difficult and it needs to get better, but it's not dire.
Yeah.
Right.
So you also need to tell the stories of the people who need to be lifted up. Like, somebody literally needs to tell your story, because it's an important one that if nobody, like, if it doesn't end up being told in a particular way, it's as though you never happened.
Right.
It's as though all of the wonderful work that people did. So we need a whole lot more people doing this work, but for the folks who did it, we can't ghost them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So archives is an interesting piece. I mean, obviously, to write a book like this about a moment in time that involved 1 million billion people and 1,000 different random emails, definitely not a single email.
Right? Although we did email correspond in the end.
Yes.
Like the last, and I'm not convinced, I'm pretty sure Renee, who, I'm not sure if Renee Boatman is here, but Renee, who has been was her assistant for many years and very kind. Renee probably sent them to me.
But tell me a little bit about how you constructed the story of, I mean, any book requires so many people, so much communication, so much back and forth, so many little marks of the pencil, everything. I mean, it's a billion paper cuts to get the book out.
Yep.
So how do you tell this story succinctly and beautifully and access all of this information?
Oh, thank you. Part of it is taking my time, much to the chagrin of, like, Joanna, my agent, and Abby, my editor, and, like, everybody else. So it took longer than I would have anticipated. I went back looking to think about this. Like, the first time I interviewed Toni Morrison was 2005.
Oh, wow.
So it really did take a while, because I needed to grow into the story, too.
It's right on time.
Yeah, and I thought I trust the universe. I have always trusted the universe for things to happen the way that they're supposed to happen, but it meant spending some time in the archive trying to figure things out as much as I possibly could. And as grateful as I was for the opportunity to be in conversation with her and for her to be very helpful about it, I didn't want a heavy-handedness.
Right.
And she was very even, like not like, this is your story, you figure out how to tell it, I'm just going to tell you if you get something wrong. Like if there's something that's just like, that's not true. Like that's just like factually, that's just not true.
And I'm gonna tell you what I want the title to be.
Yes, and she did. So there was a period when I was like almost dodging her because and again, like she and Dr. Traylor were so close friends, and Dr. Traylor always has this open house, and so she sends me upstairs to get something, and she knew Toni Morrison was upstairs. But she did not tell me. She says, baby, or daughter, go get, and so like, go get the thing or whatever, and I'm like, oh.
She's like, hey girl, hey.
Just sitting up there like a legend in waiting.
Right.
Yeah, so where are we now? It's been 10 years. Yeah, where are we? So I'm really proud, right? I'm like, because we had these conversations about titles, and titles sell, and titles are important, and it's the first thing people see, and if people like don't have a reason, they don't know anything about the book, the title's the thing. So I'm like, I have a title. And she says, all right. And I said, The House That Toni Built at Random. I thought it was cute.
It is cute. It was cute.
Yeah, it is. I was like, okay. And I was like, and it's so smart. You know, it's like Toni, Random House. Like, you know? And she goes, too long. And I say, okay. And then she sits back quietly and she says, Toni at Random.
Now that's the title.
Yeah, and I go, Toni at Random.
And it's a diminutive of the original title?
Yes.
So, you know, it is
So I felt a little
to
bit,
your
yes,
original.
I felt a little bit validated. So I go, Toni at Random. She goes, Toni at Random. I said, Toni at Random. And then I think I'm going to have to fight about it because it is an insider's title. So then I'm thinking, like, I'm completely prepared to go to battle for this title because it's the one thing she left me. And they go, yep, and sales is like, no, definitely Toni at Random. It's good. So I think, yeah, so I think
Those title wars can be
it can be tough.
brutal.
And full credit to Abby West, who gave me, like, I was like, I don't care what the subtitle is. It could be Toni at Random, ... So the rest of it, I was like, and we played with a couple of things for subtitle, but I think it's really important to think about how to put stories together because, and you got to even think about like how the title is going to be, but I appreciated the interactions and the exchanges and the breadcrumbs, but I was also worried that I was going to miss something constantly. So I wanted to tell the story in a way that honored those people who I was writing about. So when I saw Lucille Clifton in the editorial files, I wanted to see the other side of that conversation. What does it look like for the work that's at Emory? And then how do I match this story up? And then I just read a lot to figure out like who's done a really good job of telling stories around editors. And the stories that were the best to me were the ones that were messy.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean messy in a different way from what y'all are laughing.
Oh, okay.
I mean messy as in like they aren't chronological. They don't try to do this neat thing. They don't leave things out. Like I thought I was gonna have to fight about footnotes because I'm an academic and I had like MLA citation down. They were like, no, you can't do that, but you can put the notes in. So once I got to go ahead to not try to make this a neat thesis, argument, supporting documents, once I got the okay to really just tell the story and have it be circuitous like her life was, it got a little bit easier, but by then I kind of had a rhythm for it because I had the luxury of 10, 15 years of this book.
Well, it really is, you know, thank you for the work. You know, I have to say, you know, I've read everybody's biography, the publishing books, the books about publishing, the books about the business of books. You know, there's just so many of them. You know, the books about FSG, historical, you know, and, you know, I've never seen myself or any piece of myself or even like a sliver of myself reflected back in any of those books. And so this is very important to me. I think it is a real meaningful addition. And with that, we're going to move to some questions from the audience. So thank you all. Well, thank you all for asking them. Give it up for yourselves. So let's start with, did Toni have mentors, black or white, when she began editing at Random House? Or were her skills more intuitive? And there's a heart.
Thanks for the heart, especially. As far as I know, it was intuitive in part because it was very insider-ish. Nobody said, oh, come sit, let me show you the ropes. Mm-hmm. She talked a little bit about feeling very alone. Nobody said, come go to lunch with me, come have coffee with me,
Really?
let me show you, let me introduce you to. And she was also clear that the people like in the house very specifically, except for, again, the higher ups, like on the peer-to-peer level, there wasn't competition, but it was just kind of like, I'm doing my work.
Right.
Which is a euphemism for, nah, I'm good. But I think she knew that there was a community of editors outside of that space. So she was intentional about connecting with folks in different places. So she meets Toni K. Bombard through Quincy Troop. She meets, so she's always in space.
Mr. Quincy, no, everybody.
He's the guy, the poet Quincy Troop. So I think she built community in the way that she had to build community, but there wasn't a definitive mentor.
Got it. So I think both of you are going to be able to answer this. You first, but I think you might have some answers. But what would we be most surprised to know about Dr. Morrison? Thank you, and there's an XO and a smiley face.
Thank you.
Truly, thank you.
I'm curious about the thing most surprising. I think this may be just a function of my own naivete, but I was kind of surprised that she was as generous. No, not generous, as matter of fact, like I think I knew the sass, I knew like that, but there's a period when she's fighting for money for people when she doesn't have to. Like, she didn't edit Stokely Carmichael, but she had taught Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture, and she then begins to handle some of his work, and she goes to accounting to fight for him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When the chefs who contributed to Creole Feast needed, let's say, $1,500 to buy into a union. And these are old black chefs in Louisiana who had been taking money under the table, had been underpaid, but they had not been contributing to Social Security, and she recognizes this, and so they're supposed to get paid in August or something, and she's like, no, we're gonna give them their money in July, because this is the difference between their livelihood and their not livelihood. So I think I was kind of surprised that she got up from her desk to say, no, we're gonna fight for.
She seemed like she really cared.
I think so. And that's why I said I feel like kind of bad saying, like, I was surprised how caring she was. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to be that smart and also to watch people just slaying demons on TV. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It is hard to imagine the warmth.
Yeah.
Even though it clearly.
I think that was the same thing for me, and in particular, as I've said before, I was shocked. Well, I had started getting inklings about her blackness when I wrote the review of Recitative for the New York Times, and I always go down a deep hole, right? Go down that rabbit hole, and saw that she had been published in that anthology that the Baracas had edited, and there were all these black women, and there was that story. And I was like, because the public story that we get is not about black community. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's always about, this is a brilliant person who happens to be black. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was something off about that because, again, Daddy had taught at Howard with her. I knew that she had pledged a black sorority. I knew she had gone to Howard. So I was like, this is kind of weird that people aren't really talking about that.
But I think that's a surprising thing about Toni Morrison, right? Is that she clearly had multiple lives, right?
But I don't think it's a multiple life.
She was one person.
She was one person, but what I know as someone who was in white academia, for the most part, I taught at, HBCU for, a couple of years, but I was in white academia for 20-something years, is you don't, this was who I was, and I have white friends, but I'm always gonna be Black.
Yeah.
Wherever I go, I'm gonna be Black. And so when I saw her, I said, well, of course. And then really what I felt was embarrassed that had not occurred to me until I read the book. And then I began to see all these Black authors that let me tell you, when I read the Black Book article in Black World that she was talking about, this is how, and everybody who knows just a little bit about the Black arts movement, and then I was like, she was in Black World? So I was really embarrassed that, that hadn't even occurred to me. So that's
there's
what,
a whole machine behind Toni Morrison at the point that a lot of us, there's a media machine.
Yeah.
Right?
There is
Constructing an image,
there's
making
a
sure
media,
that,
right. And the thing about it is, Dana, when you go, you're at Howard, sister. You're at Howard.
Yeah,
there's a difference. Right.
It was the opposite experience.
I didn't know she was an AK is what I didn't know.
Yeah. I think for me it was, or especially around like the Blackness, the fascination was that she was so affirmatively that, and everybody was okay with it.
Because you're at Howard, sister.
That's
a HBCU. And I remember when I was teaching, because I'm a graduate of Talladega College, when I was teaching at Talladega, when everything's Black.
Everything's Black.
Everything's Black. And that's why I had to leave academia, because I was like, I'm tired of always being shocked. I was at Spelman College, I'll just say this little teeny thing. They were honoring Beverly Guy-Sheftall, who I worship, right? And I got to ask my little question at the microphone, and I start choking up, and I said, y'all just don't know what it feels like to be in this room with all these beautiful Black women, and everybody in the room said, this is Spelman. You know what I'm saying? And so that is the thing, right? You kind of get out of that headspace, except for when I'm writing, you get out of that headspace, and then you begin to understand who, as you say, the media has crafted her to be.
Right.
And I think the really important question, which we can't really answer today, is why is that?
Right.
Why have they crafted her that way?
And so I think a quick one, because we're getting to the end of this lovely conversation, but what do you think Toni Morrison would make of publishing today? There is no emoji or smiley face or heart. Whoever sent this question is
a serious question.
Right. Trying to
feel
tell
a little
you what's up.
harmed by the lack of warmth.
I think she would be advocating for more diversity, and not for diversity's sake, but because there are stories that we miss when the right people aren't in the room.
Right.
When there isn't balance in the room. There is a way that a story is told. There are stories that will not be told. There are approaches that are philosophical.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think she appreciated and so admired about her time at Howard was in the way that Kwame Ture really sums it up, is that like there's everything and its opposite in one space. And I think she thought that there's everything and an opposite for everything in the world. And if you don't have that in the room, then you miss a tremendous amount of, you miss opportunities to be better thinkers and to engage. I think she would also really, and I think she did some of this already, so I don't have to speculate so much. She would really want an industry where people could be more literary and it wasn't just for profit.
Yeah.
That you could write a really good book. You didn't have to follow the formula.
Yes.
and that you could go out and recruit. Because the difference between...
Which is amazing, because I'd argue that the literary is as at risk.
It is, very much.
As anything that has to do with diversity or, it's diversity of thought.
Yes.
Is really what you really want.
That's right. And that's absolutely the point that I think that she would make, and that race becomes a distraction for that conversation. If you're saying, because a black person who does those same paint by number stories,
right.
No, we don't want that either. We want the diversity of thought, which means you have to have a range of people who can bring that. And the literary absolutely is at risk. The stories that create a certain level of imagination. And the moment that we find ourselves in now, that's right, innovation and imagination, if we don't have that now, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We imagine that there is going to be something after this moment. We, as best as we possibly can, we will come out of this dire, whatever, this like bizarro world situation we're in. But if we can't come out of this political, social, economic, if we can't come out of this moment smarter, we're in trouble. And the literary writers are the folks who can help guide us to that philosophically and morally and imaginatively and beautifully, importantly too, right? Because you also don't want to be sad all the time.
Right.
So the writers are really important.
Yeah.
I'd like to end on that.
That's fair. Thank you so much. Everyone, please read this wonderful book. Thank you for coming, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your publication, and thank you all.